I will be looking at this very tricky topic, and I think, as you may be aware, it's very tricky even myself. But I'm going to just outline a few things, and I just want to bring to your notice a few things. In this presentation, I'll try to just bring to you the burden of pneumonia. I'll try to look at the question, when you see a child coming in with respiratory disease, is it pneumonia or is it tuberculosis? And what do we know about this type of interaction? And then I'll also try to diverge into an area of what has been found about pneumococcal disease and TB. And then I will conclude this by making my own assertions from what I've discussed. Whether pneumococcal vaccination, what does that mean for us in terms of TB case finding and in terms of tuberculosis in children? Okay. So this one, you know, this is the rationale for pneumococcal vaccination. We know that pneumococcal vaccination is very important, and this bacterium is responsible for so many deaths, about 500,000 deaths in children who are under 5 years, and I think this number has not changed up to now. It causes many things, including pneumonia, meningitis, and other bacterial diseases, otitis media, and other things like that. And children less than 2 years are especially vulnerable. Those under 2 years are much more vulnerable to infection, and the vast majority of pneumococcal disease deaths, or pneumococcal pneumonia deaths in children actually occur in the low-income countries, and we're talking about Africa and Asia. So for that reason, there's a very good reason to be able to do pneumococcal vaccination. And for those of us who've been into these campaigns, we know that pneumococcal vaccine is a little bit costly. It's more costly than all the other vaccines we've been doing. But then because of what we know what pneumonia does and what the devastating effects of pneumonia, it is a worthwhile investment. And in fact, it is thought that if you invest in this, you save actually much more money in terms of hospital time and in terms of medications. This is just a quick picture. This is from the WHO and the International Vaccine Board, trying to give us some of the numbers. If you look at the causes of pneumonia, you can see that pneumococcal disease, it contributes for a small number of the causes of pneumonia. But if you talk about what is attributable mortality, it actually contributes to much higher mortality than all the other pathogens. So for that reason, it becomes very, very important that you do vaccination. This vaccine has been found to be effective, and it is infectious. I mean, it is efficacious against pneumococcal disease. And as I'm not going to get to the vaccinology of this because a lot of advances have gone into this area. I've already made this statement that pneumococcal disease contributes disproportionately to the severe pneumonias and pneumonia mortalities. So its contribution is much higher than all the other germs. And yet, even if you look at the proportion of germs that are isolated among these children, is so small. But if you talk about the mortalities, they are quite high. And it is estimated that pneumococcus is responsible for over 1/4 to 1/3 of all the pneumonia deaths under 5. So it contributes quite a huge number. And there is an estimated 14 million cases. In 2010, about 14 million children needed admission because of pneumonia. And maybe that's why Rebecca is saying we actually probably are seeing smaller numbers because they're vaccinating, so we are probably reducing many of these numbers. And for radiologically confirmed pneumonias, a diagnosis more specific bacteriology, an estimated 27 to 36% is thought to be actually estimated to be caused by pneumococcal disease. So what I'm trying to put across to you, this is pneumococcal disease is the biggest issue in pneumonia in children. And so for that reason, it is worth having vaccination for it. And so thankfully, we are already vaccinating for these children. Now, a lot of studies have been done on the impact of pneumococcal vaccination. And this is just a small bit of everything that has been done in many countries. This is a study in Gambia. I think it's one of the biggest studies which has influenced a lot of the policies that we've seen. In Gambia, where they did a PCV, this is PCV 13. The previous one was PCV 7, again in Gambia. But this was a population-based survey, and it also included a case control aspect, looking at the before and after comparisons in Gambia. When you looked at this, it was very clear there was an association. The vaccination was associated with a moderate impact on radiological pneumonia. What I mean by radiological pneumonia is that you do a chest X-ray and you find, it looks like pneumonia. It had a small reduction in numbers in the cases of hospitalization in terms of percentage, but in terms of absolute numbers, certainly the numbers are quite big. But it showed a substantial reduction in pneumococcal and hypoxic pneumonias. And remember, we said these are the ones that they actually end up taking children to hospitals. Those kids who are breathing bad, where the parents are very, very worried. In low-income countries, the introduction of pneumococcal vaccine, right now I think we are doing PCV, are we doing 10? I think for us to do PCV 10, the difference is not so big. But if you introduce an effective vaccine and it has good coverage, then we know and we can expect quite some reduction in numbers of hospitalizations and certainly a marked impact on severe pneumonias, meaning that then we shall be able to have fewer and fewer children will be admitted, because most of our admissions are actually because of severe pneumonias. Not so many are because of, it's usually we admit severe pneumonias, at least according to our admission criteria. Just breaking this down a little bit, so I'm looking at the numbers now, look at the age groups. In the age group 2 to 11 years, 2 to 11 months, we see quite a big impact. And as I said, on the radiological pneumonia, we see that by introducing this vaccine in Gambia, it reduced the cases by 23%. And as you can, those are confidence limits. For those who understand what it is, it means that this is a significant number. So within the confidence limits. And it's not terribly wide. It's not far away. And for pneumococcal pneumonia, in the infants, there was registered a decline of 58% of pneumococcal pneumonia in that population. For hypoxic pneumonia, the numbers are similar to pneumococcal pneumonia. 57% reductions in the number of children identified with hypoxic pneumonia because of vaccination. And the children under 2 years, that's what, 1 year to 2 years, you still see the same declines, but of course you see they are more exaggerated, or maybe, you see the similar declines in terms of radiological pneumonia, pneumococcal pneumonia, hypoxic pneumonia. But in this age group, you can see the numbers are quite, they are higher, that the declines are bigger in this population. And for numbers of, the total numbers of decline, the numbers of pneumonia cases, look at the other age group of 2 to 4 years. The pneumonia cases declined by about 22%. If you look at the effectiveness of the vaccine of 3 doses, that adjusted odds ratio of 0.57 means that there's a 43% reduction in terms of the cases of pneumonia when you give this vaccine. So that's what it means. Looking at all the children hospitalized with pneumonia, and you see here, these are all children. You have a smaller decline because, of course, there's a whole mix. And in terms of clinical pneumonias, you still have even a smaller decline. But the bottom line is pneumococcal vaccination will reduce both the incidence of pneumonia, the admissions of pneumonia, the severe forms of pneumonia, and therefore the mortalities due to pneumonia. So there is no doubt that pneumococcal vaccine is a very important vaccine. Okay, but today I am discussing, in the event that this vaccine does what it does, for many of us who are interested in tuberculosis, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for us? And this is what I want to divulge into. And I hope I can pull your curiosity along with me. Okay, so now the first question is, when you see a child coming in with features of respiratory disease, is it pneumonia or tuberculosis? Or is it both? So we know that pneumonia is the leading cause of death. I've already talked about that. In older children, if you look at the numbers, 14% of all, this is a global data now, 14% of all our children actually present with pneumonia, meaning that pneumonia is a very important disease. But we're asking a question whether when you see pneumonia, is it TB or not? Right now, there is growing evidence that tuberculosis is common in children with pneumonia. And up to 23% of those admitted to hospital with an initial diagnosis of pneumonia are later diagnosed with tuberculosis. So it means that pneumonia and when a child comes with pneumonia, is it just ordinary bacterial pneumonia or this is also tuberculosis? There is overwhelming evidence to this. And right in our setting here, we did some of this work with one of the postgraduate students, Josephine, and we looked at children who came in with pneumonia. They come to acute care unit, they admitted, we admit them every day with pneumonia. And so we did a cross-sectional study and looked at these children up to 12 years who were admitted. And we were able to recruit 270 children with a clinical diagnosis of pneumonia. And for us, we chose to look for TB in all these children. So we collected sputum samples, we did the x-rays, we did even blood cultures looking for TB in the blood, trying to find, could these children have TB? And our finding was 18, almost 19% of these children were actually diagnosed with tuberculosis. This is both clinical and laboratory confirmed cases. About 19% of the children who came through acute care unit, like pneumonia, like any other pneumonia, when we investigated, actually 19% of them were treated for tuberculosis. The big question is, if we are not trying to look for TB in these children, maybe we do not know how many of these would have been found. We still think they would have found them, but we also have other evidence that many of our children who are dying, they are dying because of tuberculosis. And we are treating them for 2 weeks, and then 3 weeks, and then another week. By the time we say, oh, this is TB, the kids have this dysentery disease and they are dying. When we looked at the confirmed cases, these are either by culture, 6.3% were actually confirmed. We're talking about confirmations. So, and this is not very far from the global figures. I think the global level is about 8%. So children who are under 5, when we looked at our data, the children who are under 5 were the ones who were more likely to have this disease. When we stratified it, the children above 5 years, we didn't find so much of TB amongst them. It was the ones who were under 5 years who came with pneumonia. Many of them is just where we found most of the tuberculosis. Looking at some other work, this is more recent. So Oliver did a systematic review looking at all the literature. I know that even our study was included in this systematic review, plus many other studies, trying to pull together all these small pieces and find out, is it really, how much TB is among the children with severe pneumonia? So this systematic review plus autopsy studies, which was done in endemic areas, trying to find, now it was focused children under 5. And prospectively, all these children had diagnostic tests for tuberculosis. The findings, they found 3,644 children, that's a huge number, who had culture. Now, these ones are the ones for whom a respiratory sample was collected to look for tuberculosis. And you can see that 7.5% of these were culture positive. Okay? And all these had an acute presentation of disease. In fact, if you add those who are clinically diagnosed, that number goes as high as 25%. So the reality is when a child comes in with features of pneumonia, it actually could be tuberculosis. We know that many of our children actually present some of the acute pneumonias. TB can present like an acute disease, like acute pneumonia. But now my question was, if pneumonia and TB are presented together, and I specifically look at pneumococcal disease, is there some interaction? Is it possible that pneumococcal disease predisposes children to pneumonia, or the other way around? Now this is a tough question, and I can tell you that we'll see whether we can get an answer for it. And because of what I've said, the commonest implication of all this, pneumonia, TB, is that eventually the TB children are diagnosed late. Because by design, most of us, we first think of everything else. And the TB is the last thing. When everything else has failed, then we think about TB. And so the implication of all this is that most of our children are actually diagnosed late. And because of that, the mortality is higher. I mean, HIV positive population is even higher. And this is a study by Vianney. And actually found that the mortality was very high among the HIV positive children. But we also know that even the others who are not HIV positive, there's some other studies I didn't quote here, which actually found that one, there's delayed diagnosis. And two, most of the children who are registered in our TB program, not only in Uganda, but other countries, most of those mortalities that we see in those registers, most of those children are admitted children. And many of them, the diagnoses are late. So that's important to think about this question. Now, looking a little bit further, there is some little bit work on the presentation of TB and pneumococcal disease, this dual finding, TB and pneumococcal disease. But I've got to tell you that there's very, very little work on this, very little indeed. In fact, I did not find so much in children. This particular study was actually in adults. And this guy only described 9 cases. They had both pneumococcal disease and tuberculosis. And many of these had poor response to antibiotics after isolating pneumococcal disease. So what happens many times, you look for the germ, you pick pneumococcal disease, you say, yes, I have found it, whatever disease it is. Then you begin treating and forget that TB could be the background. For these cases, all of them, they associated pneumococcal disease. And all of them have been treated for pneumococcal disease, but they actually are not improved. It's only then that the clinician said, I think, let's look for TB. So they look for TB and find. Now, this is a very small number. And it's the tip of the iceberg. But we know that this happens all the time. And if we look for it, we would actually see much more in that. So, not being able to find that, I looked at and said, now, can we be able to look at trends? Maybe, if we look at the pneumococcal disease trend and look at TB trend and see if they maybe overlap. Probably, maybe, there could be a relationship between these two. And so I found this work which was done by Dengo. And this was based in South Africa. And they were looking at these children over 3 years. This over 3 years. And so he was looking at the seasonal patterns and trying to find out the times when they're diagnosing viral diseases, diagnosing pneumococcal diseases, and diagnosing TB. And so he was looking at those interviews. The challenge with this data, because it was kind of hospitalization data, is that some of this could be overlaps, in the sense that you are picking the same patient in more than 1 year, especially in terms of pneumococcal disease. But the bottom line was that there was a sequential observation between viral infections, pneumococcal disease, and TB. So influenza virus epidemics, they seem to have peaked close. There's a peak, and this was closely followed by pneumococcal, and then that was closely followed by TB. And the TB and pneumococcal, there was an overlap, but TB went a little bit further in terms of the numbers of cases that were being reported. Now, looking at everything that was around these patients, and this was the epidemiological data, look at the data that you have, and he thought that, it was not easy to tease out what is going on. But what is clear is there seems to be some interplay. There seems to be dynamics of interplay between the host and these infectious agents. And this seems to be quite complex. Some things that we know, for instance, I know that I'm going to talk about that, is that if you have a viral infection, the viral infections disrupt your protective system, the respiratory system. They cause inflammation, they disrupt the intercellular junctions, and that predisposes you to bacterial infection. And most of the pneumococcal disease, that's how it happens, because many of us have pneumococcal. At this age, probably we've cleared most of it, but when you're under 5, there's a lot of pneumococcal that we have, the children carry the unknowns. And most of the pneumonia happens because of these aspirations. And they cause disease because of these breakages in the system. So if a child has a viral infection, it interrupts and interferes with the protective systems, and then you end up with pneumococcal disease. Now the question was, is it possible that this very process also augments the establishment of TB? Now, this is a question that we want to see if we can answer. This was work by Moore, looking at, and this is a central thing that provoked my curiosity, that this was a probe study. It was basically looking at pneumococcal disease vaccination, and they were following up their children. Now, along the way, because when you're doing a vaccine study, you vaccinate normal children, then you keep following them up to see all who have events. So they followed up all these children. Both those who were vaccinated, the placebo, and those who were in the intervention arm. And so they followed them up for a number of years, about 5 years, looking at them. And so those who were admitted, they worked up, both for pneumococcal disease and for TB. And so when they looked at all these, when they evaluated, I'm going to show some results here, they found that actually in the arm where the children had been vaccinated, they found that there was more tuberculosis in that group than the other arm where they was not vaccinated. So now, the question was, is it, I hope I'm not put the wrong way, but they actually, no, they found that the arm where they are not vaccinated, they had more tuberculosis than the arm where they are vaccinated. Yes. I'm glad you're following me. So that type of thinking is what caused me to think and say, okay, if that is the case, is it possible that when you vaccinate one of these children, you might end up maybe with the rest tuberculosis? Is it true? Or that's one side. Then the other side is, if you vaccinate these children, I'll be coming back to that, and then you have fewer children who are coming into your facilities with features of TB, is it possible that you're missing a lot of TB? So this is the question. And so this is what they found. Children admitted with pneumonia in these settings should be investigated for underlying tuberculosis because culture-confirmed PTB in African children, which frequently present with symptoms of acute pneumonia, is probably associated with superimposed pneumonia. So they found this type of picture. And so let me get to the results. I hope so that we are clear with what I was saying. So this is a vaccine probe study to show that hospitalization for culture-confirmed TB was 43%. Okay? And was less likely among the vaccinees compared to the placebo. Hospitalization due to culture-confirmed TB among the vaccinated was less likely than the other group. So the question is it a vaccine or it is something else? In the HIV-infected children, the culture-confirmed PTB was also again less likely compared to the placebo group. The incidence of possible or probable tuberculosis was not different between the two groups. So here we're talking about the clinical diagnosis. There was not much difference. But if you went to look for culture cases, there was a difference. And the difference was that those who were vaccinated, they were less likely to have culture-confirmed TB. So is it possible that if we vaccinate more children, probably we shall not be able to be seeing more TB? And if that's the case, would it mean that therefore we are missing a lot of them because they're not coming? Now, that is an intriguing question. So let's get into some plausible explanations. And I'm going to put a disclaimer here that I'm not an immunologist, and so I'm not a specialist in these areas. So I'm going to provide as much information as I came across, and I can tell you the immunology of pneumococcal disease and the immunology of TB is complex. It's extremely complex. And so I'll be presenting what we can be able to absorb at this point in time. Now, looking at all the literature, these are some of the possible interactions I found. One, that the interactions are complex, and so the observation that was observed in this study is likely to be multifactorial. And probably the vaccine might have not been the thing. There are likely to be many, many other things. The vaccine could have modified the presentations, but probably it may not have been able to explain what we saw. So there are 4 areas that I looked at. One of the factorial levels could be the disruption of physical barriers. 2 is the dysregulation of the pro-inflammatory cytokines, specifically cytokine interleukin-1, 6, and tumor necrosis factor, specifically alpha there, and interferon gamma. That probably the dysregulation of this particular one, cytokines, could be promoting TB manifestation, or otherwise. Then the other one, dysregulation of the anti-inflammatory cytokines, specifically interleukin-10 and interleukin-17. This, I'm going to explain a bit more, but some of these cytokines, they are good in terms of controlling infections. But also they are bad because they may actually promote the dissemination of the disease. So there needs to be some good balance. Is it possible that when you get a disease like pneumococcal disease, it disbalances this balance? Is it possible that it interferes with the normal balance that happens, and therefore you have a more manifestation of the disease? So we do not know that. Then we have the toll-like receptors. This regulation, toll-like receptors is a very recent concept, and we know that it's becoming increasingly important. These are surface, they are both surface and intracellular signaling mechanisms for the body to respond to germs, including pneumococcal, including tuberculosis. Basically, using the same similar thing. Now, looking at this, as I can tell you, can see as my title says, there are some plausible explanations. This could be true, or they could just be conjectures. But we know that some of these are true for every germ. But whether they are interplaying in what the picture I'm talking about is another question. Probably that could be somebody to investigate. First of all, we know that there are some similar physical barriers apply for both these organisms, both for pneumococcal disease and for tuberculosis. And these are the same one. The mucociliary action in the respiratory tree. We know that this has capacity to actually sweep up some of the germs, including TB germs. And so sometimes they never establish. The respiratory secretions, the peptides, specifically those two, the defenses and the cathelicidins, that, especially this cathelicidin, is very closely linked with vitamin D. If you do not have sufficient vitamin D, this particular protection in your respiratory system is not as much, and maybe you are at more risk. But we also know that both pneumococcal disease and tuberculosis, both of them actually, this physical barrier can actually be able to prevent both germs. And then the last one is, of course, the epithelium, intact surfaces. These are physical barriers. But whether we think that probably, from what I have presented and the epidemiological observation, and I say this is complex, it is possible that probably when pneumococcal disease comes in, it disrupts the system. And therefore, when TB is available, it just finds an easy way and is able to establish. Now, whether that is true is yet to be investigated. And I can tell you up now, we do not have an answer for that. The second one is dysregulation of these pro-inflammatory cytokines. Pneumococcal disease specifically leads to high levels of tumor necrosis factor, which has been associated with destructive TB lesions. You know, it's good to come, it comes out, that cytokine is useful. The TB germ stimulates, so that you can come and wall off the disease, and you know, and the body contains it. But where it becomes too much, then instead of walling off, it causes destruction, and that destructive lesion can actually cause dissemination of TB instead. So pneumococcal disease has been found to stimulate high levels of tumor necrosis factor, alpha. Is it possible that that disbalance might have a role? Again, it's for us to think about. Interleukin-6 is produced in high levels after pneumococcal infection, and it is also increasing in TB infection. And we know that it regulates excessive cytokine production. And we know that some of these have feedback mechanisms. Is it possible that if you take it beyond a certain level, you end up with a negative feedback which becomes counterproductive? Now, these are observations. Linking these two is another thing. And you know that interleukin 6 also participates in recruiting neutrophils. And we know of recent that actual neutrophils play a factor in early dissemination of TB in children. We knew in the past that this is basically by macrophages. Now we know that neutrophils also actually can disseminate the disease quite early, even before you have macrophages activated. We know interleukin 6 promotes recruiting of a lot of neutrophils. Could they be coming and engulfing these germs and therefore disseminate them so early and so have disseminated disease before the body is established to fight TB? Increased levels of interferon gamma have been reported in both pneumococcal disease. And we know that these lead to the improved macrophage intracellular killing. But as you know, these are hormonal level that needs to be balanced. It is thought that probably there's an imbalance, some of this, to be able to cause some of these, what we may be seeing. So that is about pro-inflammatory factors. What about the anti-inflammatory cytokines? Anti-inflammatory cytokines. Pneumococcal disease leads to high levels of interleukin 10. And we know that high levels of interleukin 10 promote TB progression and dissemination. It does this by downregulating these other interferon gamma and tumor necrosis factor. When you do not have sufficient tumor necrosis factor, you disseminate. If you have too much of it, you cause a destruction. You also disseminate. So you need a balance. Now, interleukin 10 could be interfering with this balance because that's a possibility. And there are high levels of this. I've not talked about this tumor necrosis factor and interleukin 10 in animal models. You notice this Taylor did a study where he infected mice with a TB germ, TB leprae, which had a certain gene which had been disrupted, and that gene was designed in such a way that it could not be able to control some of these cytokines. So when they infected these mice with with that gene, there was a dysregulation of interleukin. There was a dysregulation, and therefore when they looked at the granulomas in that mice after post-mortem, they actually found that had very high levels of interleukin 10. And so it is thought that probably we know that interleukin 10 can give severe disease. In animal models, it's very established. In human beings, it is in between. Again, this is an extrapolation. Is it possible that that could be the cause? There's another condition that catches some other granulomatous granulomatous pneumococcal pneumonia diseases that happen because of dysregulation of some of these cytokines, and therefore, and causes quite severe forms of disease, even in humans. Whether there's a relationship is another question. Lastly, I'm talking about the toll-like receptors. This toll-like receptor dysregulation. I've talked about this. There are mainly two toll-like receptors, receptor 4 and receptor 2. Receptor 2 is what we've known for a long time. Receptor 4 is a more recent thing that has been found in what we think it regulates and causes what we call autophagy. Autophagy means that you give the cell a signal to kill itself because it is dangerous. So it has germs inside. So the body signals, and that cell has an auto-destruction so that it does no longer becomes a problem. So some of these are thought to signal some of this. And toll-like receptor 4 and 2, they mediate intracellular signaling. So they are both on the surface of the cell and inside. So they mediate intracellular signaling of inflammatory responses, both for pneumococcal disease and for TB. For TB, we know much more that does that most especially for toll-like TRL, toll-like receptor 2, where it does cause a lot of intracellular signaling. Now, this works with other signaling molecules to be able to produce a reaction which instructs the macrophages to kill, or some of the cells to die. If they have failed to kill, then they die. So that is signaled by these cytokines. We know that these are important signal receptors for cytokine response, and also they influence what I've called autophagy, that the cells die when they cannot survive. There's another question here. We know from observation that there are people who get disease and don't progress. There are people who get a disease and they progress. The big question is, what determines this? Again, very little is known about this. But most of the science now is thinking that this is likely to be at the molecular level. It's likely to do something to do with these cytokines and some signatures, some DNA that instruct some cells to progress and some cells not to progress. And it's thought that probably if we find out what those signatures are, and we specifically target those, probably many people who get infected will never progress, because we shall instruct that cytokine or that gene never to allow this germ to progress. Now, it appears that although most humans are exposed, they do not get disease. So exposure to the pathogen does not always, and then exposure to the pathogen does not result into development of an acquired delayed hypersensitive reaction. This has been observed. Some people just don't develop it. And the mechanism mediating the control MTB in people exposed but not developing the disease are currently unknown. And a lot of research is happening on this. A lot of research. So every single study that's doing TB these days, we are keeping blood samples. We are storing blood samples because we are thinking that we might get the breakthrough for TB in these things. Having observed this natural phenomenon, if we understand why some people never progress, then probably that will be the end of this disease. However, the interactions between these pathogens may relate to changes in the host epithelial barriers and the failure of the innate or adaptive immune system through dysregulation of these chemical mediators I've just been talking about, resulting in a window of vulnerability in the exposed host. Now, this is the thinking that probably because of this dysregulation and the fact that there is a small window whereby if either the cells or the body does not catch up, that person gets the disease. When the body catches up quickly, then that person is saved. That small window is what we're looking for. But as I've told you there, the interactions are complex, the interactions are not well lined out. But it's thought that there's a dysregulation of some kind. There's something wrong happening because some people have different cytokines. Those who develop the disease and those who don't. But what is causing what is still under investigation. I just talked about this. Vitamin D. Vitamin D reduces the growth of mycobacteria in the human peripheral blood mononuclear cells in a dose-dependent manner via nuclear vitamin D receptors. This has been heavily studied. There's a lot of work on vitamin D and TB. But the bottom line is what has been observed. You have more availability of vitamin D, you have more chance of killing the germs. These receptors, specifically receptor 2, there's activation of the human macrophages and monocytes, which result in upregulation of vitamin D receptors. And then the vitamin D1 hydroxylase genes, and this leads to the killing of the mycobacteria. So you have this upregulation, so then the body can kill this germ. Autophagy is another concept there. So interferon gamma induces autophagy. And the inhibition of autophagy increases the viability of intracellular mycobacterium. This has been observed both in the mice and the humans. And we know those interleukin 4 and interleukin 13, they actually inhibit autophagy. And reduced levels of toll-like receptor 4 enhances autophagy. Remember, I just talked about toll-like receptor 4. So it has been found that where this receptor has been reduced, then you have better killing. So where you have a system which increases the levels of toll-like receptor 4, then probably the cells will not die. And probably these people are the ones who are going to get the disease. And as I've said, this is a long story. And having said what I've said, these facts and whatever I've said suggest that there is incomplete information, first of all. The immune response that we have seen probably is sufficient, either to eliminate the germs, and therefore it suggests a potential failure in the whole system. And when pneumococcal disease comes on, is it possible that it exploits these failing points and therefore augments availability of manifestation of tuberculosis in these patients? The first is that the phagocyte is not capable of eliminating bacteria regardless of the activated state. I've talked about this. There are some cells that are activated, but because of dysregulation, they are not able to enhance what we're calling autophagy. They are not able to cause intracellular killing or dying by themselves. So this is just incomplete. Then secondly, the macrophage activation is optimal, but it is limited by the bacterium. I'm not given that information. There is some evidence that when you have bacteria persist for a certain amount of time, this activated macrophage fails to kill them. There's a way the germs, when they stay around, they produce certain substances that actually stop the activated macrophage from killing them. So they survive. So that's a failure. The other one is the activation of the infected phagocyte by the T cells is compromised within the inflammatory environment. I've talked about this. Because of these imbalances, and I'm not giving the whole story because it's a very complex area, that some of the T cells are actually inhibited by other cytokines. They have come in to kill, but they do a negative feedback on the T cells, so they end up being dysfunctional. As they don't do what you want. These mainly do. These are the cells that actually do help us to fight disease. So this system therefore is this posed as a failure. And so it brings me back to this very difficult question. Having said what I've said, what is the likely impact of pneumococcal vaccination on PTB case finding in children? Therefore, because it would mean that probably if you had a few more pneumococcal germs around, then probably we'll be able to catch many of these children because we are diagnosing many of them from the hospitals because we are not doing a lot of community work. So would it mean that if we do not have sufficient pneumococcal germs around, then probably we are going to miss so many children because they'll never come in the hospital? Now, I thought that this is a two-edged sword implication. The first thing is that if the pneumococcal disease is truly associated with PTB in children, then probably vaccination could reduce the TB disease in children. That would be a positive thing. That you vaccinate for pneumococcal, then TB germs, when you expose the child will not get a disease because this interaction is not there, and therefore the body will deal with it. That's one way. The other one is, many children are discharged from hospital without making a diagnosis for TB. And their next encounter with the health facility will be at the next pneumonia episode. So is it that if you vaccinate all the children for pneumococcal disease, and you know it's the commonest cause of admission, that this child will never be found? They will never be found. Maybe they will come back as TBM or something else. Because their next time encounter with the health worker to be able to think about TB in them might be much more prolonged. Now that's one thinking. The other one is, since many children present due to pneumococcal pneumonia, and pneumococcal vaccination might paradoxically limit TB cases, I think that, since many children present due to pneumococcal pneumonia, paradoxically, pneumococcal vaccination might actually be able to limit or may reduce our case finding, because it's the pneumonia that may be bringing the children, the pneumococcal pneumonia. And if they are vaccinated and not getting it, they probably will not come, and probably shall not find them. And then the implications is we must change strategy. And the strategy must be, we must find the children where they are, and we should not wait for those who are having these acute symptoms. There is likely a delayed presentation, therefore, and it will then mean increased mortality. I've just talked about this. It means that the children will not come quickly, and by the time they come, they'll be having advanced disease. And we know the children with advanced disease, mortality is high. So, lastly, the reduced incidence of pneumococcal pneumonia might heighten the clinician's argument to look for TB pneumonia. That's another way that, okay, since most of the pneumonias were presented with TB and pneumococcal disease, and now we know that most of the children who are actually coming in but not having pneumococcal disease, then we say, okay, fine, I think the next thing you have to look for now is TB. That's another way. That could be a way. And we think that probably that is something that might come. I mean, if there have been 100 children, now you're admitting 10 or 20, probably you'll have more time to investigate them for something more than just pneumococcal disease. And in that way, we are likely to catch more TB in these children. Having said what I've said, I want to conclude by saying this, that the interaction between MTB and other pathogens in acute pneumonia is complex, is multifactorial, and it is incompletely known. However, the epidemiological overlap of TB and pneumococcal disease hospitalization, as well as reduced incidence of TB in pneumococcal vaccinated children, suggests that a single targeted intervention could be considered to control both diseases. That's one thing. Then screening all children admitted with pneumonia has a potential in increasing TB case finding amongst these children who are admitted. Because now there seems to be some evidence that these children who come with pneumonia are likely to be having TB. And most especially if you happen to isolate pneumococcal disease from their blood or whatever, then you should actually go ahead and look for TB deliberately in these children because the chances are a little bit more. So that effect means that we need to build capacity for routine microbiological testing as well as follow-up of the children that we discharge from our hospitals, because we know that some of these children we discharge actually could be going home with tuberculosis after we have treated our pneumonia. So pneumococcal vaccination, where is the balance? What I can only say is let us look for TB in all the children with pneumococcal disease. And when pneumococcal vaccination does a very good job and reduces the numbers of children who are coming with TB in our facilities, we need to do two things. One, those who come in our facilities, let's make sure we screen them for TB always. And two, let us go and look for these children in the communities. And that means we are going to change a lot of our strategies for finding these children. Thank you very much.